Energy Vista, a podcast on energy issues, personal and professional trajectories. I'm your host, producer Leslie Palti Guzman. In each episode of this podcast, we chat with energy experts from all around the world. We exchange on timely energy issues as well on their life experience. You will learn a lot, whether you are an energy aficionado or a newbie. And one of my favorite parts of the podcast is when guests share about their personal trajectories. I always find it authentic and inspiring. It's September 25, 2020, and time for a new Energy Vista episode. Today, I'm exchanging with Dean Rachel Kyte, who became the Dean of the Fletcher School at Tufts University in October 2019, so about a year ago, and the first woman to hold this position. As a Fletcher alumnus, it makes me very proud, and I think that's a great news. Dean Kyte is a longtime climate leader, and prior to the Fletcher School, served as a special representative of the UN Secretary General and Chief Executive Officer of Sustainable Energy for All. She also previously was at the World Bank as the Vice President and Special Envoy for Climate Change. And she will tell us more about her professional trajectory in the second part of the podcast. And today we will discuss timely energy topics around the green energy recovery post COVID-19 and more on energy access too. Hello, Rachel.
Hi. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining Energy Vista. And let's delve right into the topic of the day. I listened before the podcast. I prepare, obviously, and I listened to some of the video and speech you did in recent months. And one of them was at the World Economic Forum early 2020 in Davos on the future of energy. And that was just, before COVID-19 made the headlines. And I was wondering if now that we are still in the midst of fighting this big pandemic globally, do you see it as an opportunity that will accelerate decarbonization, thanks maybe to some stimulus that we see or will continue to see around the world to fund maybe green energy infrastructure and the jobs of tomorrow, or rather that will complicate things around the energy transition because many countries are actually struggling with their budget, especially in developing countries?
Well, I remember when the first sort of lockdown happened around the world in March, people started talking about a quote unquote silver lining from the pandemic as they watched energy demand plummet. And I don't like to think of silver linings because who would ever have wanted this dislocation to come from a pandemic? But there is a golden opportunity. And I was talking to a friend of mine who holds a very senior position in a global bank earlier this week. This week is the high level segment of the General Assembly. And so it's been virtual, but there have been lots of conversations this week. And he said to me that he felt that in some respects, COVID-19 had moved to warp speed in the minds of financiers and many corporate leaders, the notion of the energy transition. So it is underway, but we now have an opportunity to really push it forward and get on a trajectory for a net zero economy by 2050. And I think there are two real dilemmas here, right? One is helping, that's my dog in the background, that's a COVID companion,
Nice.
is helping countries who are already indebted use the support that they've asked for from the IMF and from elsewhere to be able to make the transition where they are heavily carbon intensive economies and to use the funds that must come to help them. The collapse in oil prices and the fact that they haven't bounced back and they are low has doubled down on investor interest in the tail end of the fossil fuel era, and at the same time has sped up interest in renewable energy, which has shown itself to be a little bit more resilient through the COVID crisis. And then I think that there is a sort of public issue around clean air, which I think has become more prominent as a result of a respiratory crisis, which is what COVID is. But I think there's a real danger that we miss the opportunity to invest in clean and green in recovery packages And all the data show that while all the advice is that there are things that you can do in your recovery packages which will move you to a cleaner trajectory and help the energy transition, and will also help with short-term jobs and with income generation, which is what all countries want, that at the moment, a minority of the funding that's going into recovery packages is actually green. The real problem is the indebted middle income and low income countries who are going to get more public support from the IMF and elsewhere, and who, their public balance sheets are going to be full of state-owned enterprises, which are very carbon intensive. We're really going to have to help those countries move through the energy transition and recover from COVID at the same time. It can be done, but it's a Herculean effort.
And is there a danger that in our developed countries, banks, big financiers are taking decision to stop financing some fossil fuel projects, but that would come at the expense of energy access in other parts of the world?
No, I think that the numbers I was looking at recently, and they may be slightly out of date, but there's more than $11 trillion of assets under management which have now divested from coal and oil in particular. That's a sort of 22,000% increase since 2014, when exactly on this day, Ban Ki-moon, who was then the Secretary General of the UN, called for political leaders to put a premium on climate action 1 year before the Paris Agreement. So in 6 years, you've seen this exponential rise in a decision to divest, and that's because the returns are not believed to be there. I don't think that is actually affects energy access for the poorest. If you look at the lack of energy, then we're talking about 800 million people, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa and parts of South Asia, who don't have access to reliable, affordable, clean energy. They are not going to be reached by large fossil fuel installations. They're going to be reached by decentralized renewable energy, improved grid and some grid extension, and then fully sort of off-grid services. And then eventually, as modern grids are built out, those are going to be predominantly full of electricity coming from solar, from wind, from geothermal, from hydro. There'll be gas in Africa as part of the transition. But I think the big question is, if gas is a bridge to the future, how long is that bridge? So I think that the idea that you need fossil fuels to end energy poverty didn't work when energy prices were different. It certainly doesn't work now.
Yeah. And I know energy access is a topic close to your heart. There is also the question of access to clean cooking.
Yes.
Because traditional polluting fuels are very harmful to health and environment. We see, for instance, that India is expanding the use of cooking gas to household kitchens with more city gas distribution. What are the solutions that we're exploring right now around cleaner cooking?
Well, so this is the one area where I think gas really is a bridge, because the lack of access to clean cooking fuels and clean technologies for cooking is an extraordinary problem in the world. It's about 2.8 billion people don't have access. Those are mainly women, and it's women and children's health which is highly impacted. That number has moved down, but very, very, very slowly. And it's a persistent problem across South Asia in particular, and across large parts of sub-Saharan Africa. And what people are using to cook, therefore, is biomass, charcoal, they're deforesting. It's a driver of deforestation. This is really a compounding problem. And so getting people access to clean cooking is not only the right thing to do from a gender perspective and the right thing to do from a health perspective, it's very much the right thing to do from a planetary perspective. Now, we are a way away from having really cool solar cooking devices in everybody's homes, which I assume must be a future that we are capable of building. So in the future, especially in urban areas, moving families onto LPG and away from charcoal or biomass or destructive fuels, which are also bad for the health, it seems to me a very important thing to do. Now, I think that we need some real financial innovation and some real business innovation and listening to what consumers want in the clean cooking space. And I know that overseas development assistance, sort of, the foreign aid that goes from European countries to Africa and elsewhere, is beginning to put constraints around the ability of that money to being able to be used for LPG because it's a fossil fuel. But honestly, I've been working on helping the Rwandan government with meeting their clean cooking goals. Rwandan women in the villages of eastern Rwanda are not causing climate change, and so I do think that this is the one area where, as part of the transition, moving urban families onto LPG with the expectation that they will then move on to solar cooking in the future or some other clean fuel, for me seems reasonable. But the point is that this should be much higher up the priority list than it is at the moment.
Right. And this, I think this question of transition is very important because some developing countries may not always be able to leapfrog. I mean, maybe we see some leapfrogging in some case by case countries, but it's not always possible to jump from a very polluting fossil fuels to the cleanest new technology.
Well, so I think that might be true, but I honestly believe that there's a lot of technology available today that we are not deploying, and we're not deploying at scale, and we're not deploying into emerging markets and low-income countries. And if we just made some of the technologies that are available today, I think that would have a huge impact. Secondly, we, as you know, energy investments are long-lived investments, and so what we're going to invest in today will still be there in 10, 20 years, and to invest in something which is going to be obsolete and certainly not going to generate an economic return in a reasonably short period of time just seems that we are, encouraging countries to indebt themselves even further. And so I do think, people have called for a Marshall Plan. Yeah. People have called for, extraordinary effort. And I really do feel that that's what you need. I mean, it is impossible to imagine how, some of the economies on the African continent are going to grow and meet the needs of their people without reliable, affordable, and I think clean electricity. And, solarizing the Sahel, bringing offshore wind around West Africa and other parts of the coastline. This seems to me like a really quite good return on investment, but we've got to build a new table with the Chinese and the Indians, Europeans and others there. I've talked to Indian entrepreneurs who are much more bullish about investing in parts of Africa than European firms. So the European utilities are reinventing themselves as modern, renewable, and clean electricity companies. But they want guarantees and support from IFC and development financial institutions in Western Europe. I've seen Indian companies with an export credit guarantee offered to them back in Delhi, really taking a much more profound, a much more sort of deterministic view of the risk and building mini grids and standalone renewable energy installations across West Africa. I think that this has to be something where we build a table and we say, this is something that we've got to do in the next 10 years. If we're going to get to zero net carbon by 2050, half of those emissions reductions have to happen in the next 10 years. And so if business as usual is not working, then let's build a table and bring everybody who needs to be at that table around the table, and let's work out how to do it in the next 10 years.
And what do you think are the biggest challenges for developing countries to move ahead with their decarbonization? Is it more a question of finding the funding, putting together the financing, or having the government, putting all its might towards this goal, or actually peer pressure, from the international community? Like what are the drivers now?
Well, we shouldn't generalize, but there are a number of drivers, I think. So first of all, in finance, the cumulative impact of country risk, credit risk, small project risk, when it mounts up, it becomes something that's unattractive. And so everything that a developing country or a low-income country can do to improve its governance, to improve its business enabling environment, and its planning and its sense of what an integrated energy plan looks like, one that is going to meet the needs of its people in terms of access, one that's going to boost efficiency, and one that's going to improve the energy mix, then that makes it more likely that investment will be attracted. Secondly, the aid community and the development finance community slice and dice and put too many bells and whistles and conditions on the money. And frankly, we have to pool the funds into bigger pools and make it more clearly and understandably accessible, because when I'm advising developing countries and you're looking at it from their end of the spectrum, you just see 100 different funds. They're all tiny. They've all got different rules attached to them. Some of them allow for reflows. I mean, it's enormously complicated. And I think this issue is now getting more and more political attention under COP26. Thirdly, inertia and incumbency. Most developing countries, let's take sub-Saharan Africa, I think there's only 2 or 3, or maybe not even that many, utilities which are solvent and well managed. And so you've got to have institutions that are able to manage the transition, and getting the bandwidth and the managerial capability is something that the rest of the world could help with enormously. And then you've got a lot of people knocking on your door trying to sell you old kit, as we say. So the standalone IPP coming from Korea or China or elsewhere, the coal-fired power plant, the diesel, the heavy fuel oil, this is still being sold to people under terms which are not beneficial. And so being able to have the plan which allows you to know that transition is possible, I think is really important. We could get into other issues of capital flight and the need to improve tax bases and things that are dealt with by the UN under the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. But those are some of the interlocking pieces, I think.
Yeah, and it's a complicated, complex issue, but I think it's very interesting to understand all the complexity, actually, because it's not something that we can do overnight.
I mean, Sebastian Kind, who used to be the Vice Minister of Energy in Argentina, at the time when Argentina really made a big shift forward in installation of renewable energy, he was given an award and has taken the money from that award and set up an organization based out of Brussels called Green Map. And what he's trying to do is sort of, based on his experience in Argentina and the experience of other people around the world, sort of give you a sort of policy roadmap, what to do in order to grow your renewable energy part of the mix in a box, as it were. So, almost to hand over a package and say, here are all the tools you need, and follow this menu, and it will. And I think that kind of breaking things down and giving people a policy roadmap. We do this at Fletcher with the Climate Policy Lab. I think this is really important.
And do you think there is a risk for industrialized nations and companies, to export the dirtier fuels to the developing world, to export their expertise with fossil fuels and their infrastructure built up elsewhere?
Yes, I think this is it's been a significant concern, and I think we're trying to sort of close the loop on that. The Secretary General, who I still have the privilege to advise, has been very explicit with G20 countries in particular, who are still using their export credit guarantee mechanisms, using their public funds to subsidize and to sell coal-fired technology in particular into Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Africa. And that has to stop. It's been interesting and that's been a big debate recently in Korea, in Japan, in China. But still, you see from Western members of the G7 and G20, fossil fuel subsidies being applied domestically, and then export credit guarantees being given to technologies which are involved in that end of the energy spectrum as well. And so you're starting to see this closing down, because it has no place in the ratcheted up ambition that countries are coming forward under the Paris Agreement. But also it's sort of, I think you're starting to see developing countries sort of say, look, this isn't the best deal for us. And I thought that, the decisions that the Kenyans made over Lamu were quite important, where, there were a group of financiers and technology had come together for a coal-fired power plant on the pristine northern coast of Kenya, and I think through the Kenyan courts that was turned back. So the Belt and Road Initiative from China has been interesting because the vast majority, a lot of that was energy infrastructure, and the vast majority of it was not for renewable energy. And I think that the conversation between the international community and the Chinese about the future of the Belt and Road is really about, shouldn't the Belt and Road be a green Belt and Road? And I think that conversation will now move forward more quickly with Xi Jinping's announcement this week that China intends to be net zero by 2060.
Yeah. And on the other side of the story, there are some countries in Africa, in Southeast Asia, that want to be the one picking their energy mix and their fuel, and don't want to be dictate, not to use coal because it's too polluting, or another, like they want to be in control maybe more of their their energy future of tomorrow.
Right. And I think that and they should be. And for 50 years the industrialized world sold their technologies to and sold their technologies to developing countries. And at that time, what were we building? We were building fossil fuel energy systems, and so that's what we sold, right? And then we kept on selling it long after we knew what the dangers were to people's health and to the planet. And now Western sources of finance and international finance will have nothing to do with those technologies anymore. Why? Because there's no return on them economically. B, they're harmful to human health. C, they're harmful to the planet. So I understand that developing countries want to determine their own energy futures. And when I was working at Sustainable Energy for All, that's what we were doing, is helping every country work through how it could achieve Sustainable Development Goal 7, which is reliable, affordable, modern, sustainable energy. And the reality is that for most developing countries, there is an opportunity to leapfrog. There is an opportunity to go to a much bigger renewable energy mix quickly. They don't have to go through the decommissioning of a fossil fuel energy system to the extent that the industrialized world does. And there's also an opportunity to leapfrog in terms of using digitalization and using decentralization to give them much more energy efficient systems, and to give them systems that meet the needs of their communities, even when they're sort of very remote or isolated. So it isn't just about decarbonisation. The future energy systems will be digitalised and more decentralised than they are today, and they will be decarbonised, and they will be cheaper, and they will be reliable. And I think that when you have energy ministers and prime ministers and leaders who get that and are prepared to pursue it, you see remarkable progress in a very short period of time. Look at Kenya, look at Morocco, look at Chile, look at Argentina. There are plenty of examples of countries really bending the curve in all directions.
And I think here the key is also to differentiate between fossil fuels. I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about how gas might be a bridge. We don't know for how long. But also the fact that we need reliability. So gas can be also balancing resource and complement renewable. But I think again, there is a risk of picking a winner, or say, we don't want natural gas at all. What we don't want is the emission from natural gas. If tomorrow we come up with carbon capture and sequestration or other, regulating methane emissions, things that make it less harmful, I don't think it's. I think it could be detrimental to energy transition to just ban gas, because now you can hear some people saying, well, gas is the next coal, and at one point we will move definitely away from fossil fuel. But I think it's a transition, and gas might be part of this transition.
Yeah, so gas is going to be part of the energy mix for decades to come. The question is how quickly it gets curtailed, how quickly it is diminished in the energy mix, and what will be the economics of storage and capture and use, right? So at the moment we have a situation where for 2/3 of the people on the planet, new installation of energy is cheaper if it's renewable than if it's fossil fuel. So the prices have already come down. The prices of storage are coming down at the same pace, right? So how do you make those technologies available to everybody? That's one. Second then is, who's going to pay for the storage and the capture and the use of emissions from fossil fuel energy in the developing world? So I think capture, storage and use are a part of the future, but they have to be paid for, and those are not going to be paid for by public aid money, I think, right? So the dynamics of that have to be sorted out. And so for gas companies, they're gas companies, but actually they're energy companies, and in actual fact, they have to be carbon management companies. Every molecule of carbon, has to be captured and not allowed into the atmosphere. And so that if you can make a business of that, and if that can be economically viable, then that's a big part of the energy mix. So we see carbon capture and storage and use in China, in some other. It's growing in the developed world, in some middle income countries. But if you're going to put new LNG terminals and you're going to put large refining and manufacturing and heavy industry in the low income countries that still need to grow and still need to develop, then we're going to have to do clustered carbon capture, storage and use. Say, for example, near Lagos, just as we're doing on the North Sea on both the UK and the Dutch side of things. So, where is that industrial planning coming from, and where is that going to happen? I think this is a big part of the conversation. And the other thing I would say is that electrifying everything is one piece of it, and then the things that can't be electrified easily, so the high heat and the difficult manufacturing, the hard to abate sectors. Yeah. So here, we've got blue hydrogen, we've got brown hydrogen, we've got grey hydrogen, green hydrogen. But the hydrogen economy offers huge opportunities in some parts of the world, and helping low-income countries and growing economies to capture the benefits of hydrogen as well is going to be very important. So this has to be a decade of infrastructure. Not talking about infrastructure, but actually, building it, investing in it, and speeding up the way in which technologies are moving into every corner of the world.
Yeah. Well, on this note, let's move to your personal and professional trajectory. So how does one become a dean? Did you apply for the job? It seems that you were the right person at the right time. You combine the fact that you're a woman and you have a long time focus on climate change. Was that, you think the best arguments for your pick?
No, I did apply for it. I had, I'd been working in very, very high pressured, intensive international jobs for many years, and I was I've got two children who you might be able to hear in the background, and I was two things happened in the work of the last 5 years. So since 2015, since the Paris Agreement and the SDGs, I became absolutely convinced that the younger generations see the world differently and are prepared to embrace solutions that older generations find more difficult to get their heads around. And so I was excited by the opportunity to support younger people to bring their leadership forward earlier. And then the second thing was I was sitting in an airport, as I did all the time. I was sitting in a business class lounge somewhere worrying about my carbon footprint. And I was talking to colleagues who worked at different institutions, and you kind of know each other over the years, and you bump into each other in business class lounges. And one of them sort of said to me, an offhand comment sort of said to me, the one thing I regret, if I regret anything, I've loved everything that I've done, is that, the kids grow up so quickly, especially when they're teenagers. And I wasn't there for a lot of the conversations I needed to be there for. I got on the plane and I thought, I really don't want to ever have to say that to anybody. And so I made a decision that I would step off the international development carousel for a few years. And just as I'd made that mental decision and focused on the fact that I really thought that investing in young people is important, the opportunity to the process for selection of dean opened up, and so I put my hat in the ring.
Very good. And so now you have the job, but also like the challenge of training the global leaders of tomorrow. What do you think? What is the emphasis those days? What do you think are critical in terms of maybe ethics or focus? What are going to be your priorities to train those next leaders?
So that's a really good question. So I think that the job of leadership is almost more complicated today than before. And so you need to have really good hard skills. This is a world where data is informing everything. You know, machine learning and big artificial intelligence are transforming decision making in every field. And so you have to have good sort of hard skills in terms of not being an expert in all of those things, but understanding how they're changing things. And you still have to have what Fletcher has focused on for more than 80 years is the analytical capability to be able to be a problem solver. And so what I
Still
find,
using it every day.
yeah, so what we're doing is doing the complex analytical problem solving interdisciplinary approach to problems that we've always done, but also give people more hard skills. And then there's the intangible. If you look at successful leaders today, whether it be in the corporate sector, whether it be in elected leadership or leading in complex institutions, building social trust within your corporation, within your community, within your country is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Social leadership means that the leaders that excel in building social trust are ones that are authentic, ones that have a high level of integrity, ones who can acknowledge that they don't know everything. There's a reason why you're starting to see more and more women coming into positions of leadership in high social trust arenas. And I think that giving people the confidence to be that kind of leader, I think is really important. And that is about courage. So every student who comes to Fletcher has got courage inside them. They wouldn't be there if they didn't. And our job is to help you tap into that courage and be the leader you want to be.
Very interesting. And so right now, Fletcher is teaching remotely all the classes.
Yeah. We're doing it quite well, I think, and the students are getting a bit tired of Zoom, but it's not what we would like. And about 30% of our students are international this year.
Yeah. Well, that's something that I really, really enjoyed when I was at Fletcher, is that the ratio of international students is really high, and it makes it a very, distinguished program because of this, richness of interaction that you may have.
Yeah, so we've one of the reasons we went remote is because we want the unity of the class, and it just was unbearable to us to think that we would be hybrid, and the students who could get to Medford, just outside Boston, could have something that the students who couldn't. And because of the immigration problems that we're experiencing at the moment, it was impossible for us to do that. So that's why we made a fairly early decision that we would be only remote. And so we have about 30% of this incoming class that's international. Normally, we're closer to 40%. And that number will come back with deferrals later this year. And so we've got students in every time zone. And so we changed our teaching block, and we changed the structure of classes and the structure of each course. And so we're doing much more teaching early in the morning and much more late at night, so that our students in Europe, Eurasia, Asia, Africa can participate.
Very good adjustment. And we hear a lot that for American university, a new issue is to attract Chinese students, with all the relationship that, all the tensions going on between the US and China. Do you still have some Chinese students?
Yes, we have a healthy cohort of Chinese students, Chinese PhDs and Chinese postdocs. They are very, very important and welcome part of our community. I think that some of our competitors sort of made a big play for Chinese students, and sort of we're focused on a sort of a Chinese strategy. We never did that, but we continue to have a really wonderful Chinese cohort, and we have good relationships with Chinese academic institutions. I think the challenges at the moment are challenges of cybersecurity and the way in which Chinese students can participate when they're sitting in China studying in a US university. There are some issues there. And then there have been issues of for faculty who are outside of China and whether or not they have experienced cyber attacks, etc. It's not exclusively coming from China, but
I'm very interested. Yeah.
It's the issue that has come to the forefront. And of course, there is now concerns, especially in the UK and the US, around collaborative research and how that's governed, and what some entities in China and other countries want to get out of that collaborative research. So we take our precautions and we take care of our Chinese students. And
I heard you saying it in one of, I think it was in the commencement speech maybe, that you had a very good quote, that life has a practice of leaving you if you don't leave it. So I don't remember exactly the context, but can you tell us maybe what you meant?
Yeah, I mean, you get one shot at it, right? And it's so easy to live in the future, live in the past, and it will come at you. And I think that what we feel at this particular moment of dislocation, a dislocation because of COVID, a dislocation because we face other threats, and some of them existential, a dislocation in the social fabric, the challenges around inequality that we face. It feels like the world's coming at us so fast, and we live a virtual world, a data-ridden world. If you don't grab hold of life, it will grab hold of you, and it will be gone in a flash. And I think it takes real courage to breathe deeply. It takes real courage to be silent and to think. It takes real courage to listen rather than to talk. In that is leadership too. And there's also, I think, I think when I was speaking, a lot of young people were feeling like the world was, the pandemic was happening to them, right? Well, actually, the pandemic was happening to everybody. And if you were at Fletcher, no matter how vulnerable you were, you are some of the luckiest people on the face of the earth, right? And there are people who are much, 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 much more vulnerable than us. And so just stepping outside of yourself every now and again and just, being quiet, being silent, taking a deep breath, I think is important. So grab hold of life before it grabs hold of you, because I think it comes at you very fast at the moment. It feels that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for those illuminating and wise words. And I hope we'll continue the conversation.
I really enjoyed it. Take care, and thank you so much for inviting me on.
Yeah, thank you. That concludes our Energy Vista podcast, which was recorded on September 25, 2020. This is Leslie Palti Guzman saying good day and good luck.